Hey Art Nerds, happy holidays and Merry Christmas. Today I'm going to show you how to draw and design your own Nutcracker. So this is just a fun, fairly easy drawing tutorial. You don't really have to be great at drawing people, but we are going to talk about the very basics of figure drawing. And you can design your Nutcracker to look like whoever you want. I actually based this one off of my husband, Joseph, and should I ever decide to color it, I'll base the coloring off of him. One of the things I do recommend you guys do is I recommend you Google Nutcrackers or work from a Nutcracker you have in real life. So I am starting by using Pentel Pilot pink lead as my underdrawing, and I'm using pink because it shows up on camera. I started with a straight line drawn vertically top to bottom. This is our center line for the Nutcracker, and then I drew a large rounded rectangle for the head, a rounded rectangle that's slightly longer for the top part of the torso, and then I drew a rounded rectangle that's much shorter for kind of the hips or the skirt on the Nutcracker. I drew two straight lines coming off the sides of our torso rectangle for the arms, and then two lines going straight down for the legs. Now when you think about Nutcrackers, they're constructed from wood, and they're actually pretty simply constructed. They have just some very basic woodworking parts on most Nutcrackers. So once I have my base sketched in, I draw the actual nut cracking mechanism for the mouth, where on the lever on the back you pump it and it opens the mouth and cracks the nuts. And then I drew two cylinders for the arms and topped those with two spheres or two circles, one at the top and one at the bottom. You don't have to draw the one at the top. Some Nutcrackers have like pauldrons and some have like epaulettes, but you do need to draw the ones at the bottom. Those are the hands. And I do apologize for my camera losing focus and getting kind of fuzzy. We're still getting to know each other, so this is practice for me, just as this drawing might be practice for you. In the center of our Nutcracker's face, I drew a large rectangular nose, and now I'm going to pull out so you guys can actually see the whole thing. Zooming back in, we're going to work on the features of the face first. So I divided the face in half again horizontally this time. I drew our mystical third eye right above the nose, and then on either side of that third eye, I drew our actual eyes. Now most people, their eyes are at least one eye width apart. Some people's eyes are spaced a little wider, some are a little closer, but in general, your face is 5 eye width wide and 1 eye width apart for the eyes. So that's what I did here. And now I'm working really closely from my visual reference that I have pulled up on my computer, not shown here, to kind of draw in some common features for Nutcrackers. So not all Nutcrackers have a wooden hat. This one is going to. He's kind of, like I said, based off my husband, but also based off the Nutcracker prints. So I'm drawing a crown, and the way a lot of Nutcrackers have their crowns designed is you have a solid piece of rounded rectangular wood on top, so I guess like another head glued on top, and I then drew kind of a crown design on that. And you'll also notice that Nutcrackers have fluffy glued on hair these days. I think it's like synthetic hair, but I think in the old days it used to be like rabbit fur. So you have this really fluffy hair. Also gave him red cheeks, and although Joseph doesn't have much facial hair, I did give him a small goatee because many Nutcrackers do have at least some kind of a beard. That's to hide the bottom part of the Nutcracker mechanism. Then they also have those really scary open mouth teeth. The gnashing teeth. At least that's what I always think of when I look at them. I do have a couple of Nutcrackers that are like rabbit Nutcrackers that don't have that at all. So if that bothers you or freaks you out, it is a little bit creepy looking. You don't have to do that. So on the torso, I added buttons. I also added straight lines on the bottom part of the Nutcracker mechanism like it's a vest or an open shirt. I drew a belt, and I'm replicating that open vest design on the bottom there. On the arms, I'm going to turn those balls into decorative epaulettes. So I'm just drawing some triangular fringes coming down off of the balls. I'm adding cuffs to the shirt, and I'm going to leave the hands as just circles. Some Nutcrackers are carrying a sword, some are based off of Santa Claus and they're carrying a staff. You can decorate your Nutcracker however you wish. I'm just going to leave them empty-handed just for ease of demonstration. So Nutcracker legs are basically just two straight cylindrical wooden dowels coming off the body of the Nutcracker and attaching to the base. So I'm trying to replicate that here, and they don't even, in real Nutcrackers, they just come straight down. There is no curve, there is no slant at all. I drew two half circles for the front parts of the boots, and now I'm just drawing the base. You don't have to draw the base, but since most Nutcrackers are attached to a base and I'm just doing a pretty straightforward drawing of a Nutcracker, I thought I would draw the base. I also drew a couple of pecans, one unshelled and one shelled, because, you know, as a Louisiana girl, pecans are the big nut for the holiday season for us here. So we start out with our sketch framework that kind of allows us to place everything and align everything, and this is the point where you're going to want to pose your Nutcracker. Then we start sketching in the rough basic details, trying to keep everything just very loose and very light. We're still just figuring things out. Then we refine our details, working heavily from reference as well as from our imagination. This is the chance to make your Nutcracker yours. So in this tutorial, I'm also going to ink this Nutcracker. I am using a Kuretake Furinosuke, Furigo Kochi brush pen. These are some of my favorite brush pens. You can get really fine lines, you can get really thick lines, so it's like all the best parts of a technical pen in one pen. These things are super handy. Now, these are not waterproof, but that's okay. I'm inking this in my sketchbook, so if I'm going to color this, I will probably color it digitally, or I may scan it and reprint it onto a different paper. And if I were to want to watercolor it or use alcohol markers on it, then I would ink it with the Sakura Pigma FB, which is waterproof and alcohol marker safe. So at this point, I'm just kind of tightening up the details. So like the lines on the hat, for example, I'm turning those into tiny little pearls or little beads. And the thing about inking with brush pens, the thing about inking in general is the more you do it, the more you practice, the more risks you take, and the more mistakes you make, the better you're going to get. So it's okay if you're not good at inking now. You're putting in that time investment, and later on, if you keep inking, if you keep practicing, you are going to get better. Now, the thing about drawing is it's kind of a common adage that the more you draw, the better you're going to get. And it is true, you cannot get better at drawing if you don't ever draw. However, you can stay equally bad for years if you don't practice with intention. And I speak from personal experience. I drew all through middle school and high school. I loved drawing, and I never improved because I didn't have any guidance, and I also didn't draw anything that wasn't immediately in my comfort zone. I also didn't practice drawing from reference enough, and I didn't really understand human anatomy or how to take what I'm seeing on a person and break that down. And you know, a lot of that is just lack of access to information in the early 2000s. We had some pretty limited how to draw manga books. I grew up in rural Louisiana, so the art book section was even more limited, and the internet didn't really have a lot of tutorials then. YouTube wasn't a thing, and there were only a couple of artists who took the time to write and scan and draw all that information to share it freely online. So if I can improve, you definitely can improve, because you are in a time where there is so much access to information, and it's available freely, or you can request it at your library, or it's available very cheaply. So don't get discouraged if you don't draw as well as you'd like to draw now. There's plenty of time to practice in the future. And I do have tutorials here on the channel where I walk you guys through inking a bit more. I think at this point I've been inking with a brush pen for so long that it's actually kind of difficult for me to explain the basics of it because it's become second nature for me. But I'll try to give you guys some very basic pointers. The lighter you hold your pen, the lighter your line weight, the thinner, the smaller your line weight is going to be. The more you press down with your pen, the heavier the line weight is going to be. With the Tombow Furigo Kochi, don't be afraid of breaking it. Now, you can break cheap fiber brush pens like The pip pens, those do break over time. So if you're heavy-handed or if you want to bear down and get those really nice, thick, juicy lines, I would recommend going with a Japanese brush pen that has a foam rubber tip. And you guys have probably heard me talk about foam rubber tips a lot. There's a reason I like them. They're great for heavy-handed people and they can take a lot of wear and tear without just dying. So the Futogo Koche does have a foam rubber tip, and I'm happy to recommend other great brush pens for you guys if you're interested in inking and this one just doesn't quite cut it for you. The Sakura Pigma FBs are great. The Sakura Pigma BB, i.e. big brush, are great. The MB, strangely enough, utilizes a fiber tip, so it's not so good. Tombo's Furenosuke brush pens, those are very, very fine brush pens. They're available in a lot of colors and they're waterproof and alcohol marker proof. Those are great. You guys have seen me use those a lot on this channel. And I also really like individual nylon bristle brushes. So I really like the Pentel pigment brush pens and I really like the Kuretake Cambio Tambien brush pens. And those are still going to be true for the lighter you hold them, the thinner the line, the more you bear down on them, the thicker the line. So generally you're going to use thinner, lighter line weights as objects are closer to their light source. And if you want a cheaty way to do that, to indicate light source, you can use the thinner, lighter lines at the top of an object, and then you can use your heavier, darker lines at the bottom of an object. And that's just kind of a cheaty way to imply line weight. You can also add a darker line where two objects overlap. So like where the bottom of our Nutcracker's torso overlaps the legs, I could go back in and do a darker line on each leg, and that would indicate some depth, that would indicate some shadow of the torso overlapping the legs. Also, lighter objects like the hair would have a lighter line weight, and heavier objects would have a heavier line weight. So a feather would have very light line weight, an anvil would have a very heavy, darker line weight. Objects of importance that you want people to notice might have a heavier line weight, whereas less important objects might have a lighter line weight. If you're drawing objects in a mirror, you would use a lighter line weight and kind of skip the lines like it's a reflection. I know when we look at real reflections, they're usually very realistic, they're very rendered out. But using the lighter skipped lines implies reflection. It implies non-reality. You would use the same techniques if you were inking something seen through a fog or maybe even something seen through a window to imply that there's something in between the viewer and the object itself. So those are some of my basic inking tips, and now we have inked our Nutcracker. I hope you guys enjoyed this drawing tutorial. I hope it was useful, helpful, and informative for you guys. If you enjoy drawing tutorials like this one, if you plan on sharing this with a class, please consider joining me on Patreon at patreon.com/nattosoup and helping financially support tutorials like this one. So I hope you guys have a Merry Christmas, a Happy Holidays. I hope it is safe and happy and warm, and I hope to see you guys again soon with another drawing tutorial. Bye guys!